Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Green, and I have with me here today Hannah Moore. Hannah graduated from STU in 2020 with majors in Environment and Society and Communications and Public Policy. During her time at STU, she was a leader of several environmental actions. These included organizing a campus protest against oil pipelines. She participated in Fridays for Future events. She co-chaired the student group STU Sustainability from 2017 to 2020. And from 2019 to 2020, she was the coordinator of the Divest campaign, where she delivered presentations to the Students' Union, Faculty Association, STU Board of Governors, Investment Committee, and several university classes. In this, Hannah also developed and circulated a petition and information booklet on the campaign, which collected over 300 signatures from the university community, including staff, students, faculty, and alumni. She was also responsible for creating and managing social media accounts for the campaign and represented the campaign at various gatherings, including STU Leads and various climate rallies. Hannah was also an intern at the Conservation Council of New Brunswick and at Hayes Farm, a community-led farm in Fredericton, that provides young people with skills, expertise, and support to practice human-scale regenerative agriculture. And she has also worked as a food security and regenerative farm reporter for the research group Raven. So we have a very amazing individual on this podcast today who has lots of expertise, and we look to her as an activist role model. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. We will get started. We have lots of questions and would love to hear your insight on them. So my first question for you, Hannah, is as an environmental activist, what motivates you and what are your biggest motivators?
I would definitely say it was, I guess, being in the environment program. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I first started university, and taking my first intro to environmental studies class really was an eye-opener for me. And it shocked me to the point of oh my gosh, our futures are really on the line. This is insane. I hadn't really realized the severity of a lot of issues that we're faced with today. So just understanding that our futures and our children's futures are really on the line. That's definitely a big motivator for me. And I don't know, I would say I stay motivated by definitely being surrounded by like-minded people. So that's what I really enjoyed about the program at STU and being involved in so many different things. Just the people around me really helped me stay motivated because they were all passionate about similar things. It's a lot harder to do those sort of things on your own because it's really easy to get overwhelmed and burnt out. So definitely being surrounded by people who are like-minded and passionate about the same things as you is definitely essential for staying motivated. And also having work-life balance, I think, is really important too, because as I mentioned, burnout is really common among environmental activists, just because there's a lot of kind of heavy stuff that you're dealing with. So that's definitely important in maintaining your work and working towards your goals. So yeah, definitely balancing out your activism with other things is really important for staying on track, I'd say.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know that environmental activism burnout is definitely a real thing that a lot of people feel, which brings us to our next question. Hannah, we're wondering what are your thoughts on how we can engage a discussion about the climate crisis without sounding gloomy about the future? How do we bring optimism to the conversation?
I think that's definitely a really important thing to do because there's so many environmental campaigns or people just throwing all this really sad information at you, and it can put you in a really dark place. It's really upsetting to learn a lot of this stuff. So it's really important, I think, to find those good stories, something great just happened, or this has been a successful protest, or we've seen changes in policy. like adding those happy endings into discussions about environmental issues is really important. And as well, I think when you're addressing a specific issue, not just to like talk about that issue and like all of the negatives, but also like wrap in like the potential solutions and how we can like work towards solving this issue and like seeing improvements. So yeah, talking about solutions and how you can get there and not just focusing on how bad it is and like all of the negatives is definitely important, I would say, because it can get really upsetting if you don't look at like, okay, how can we actually take steps to get to a solution and get to a better place than where we're at right now.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely some sound advice. And I guess kind of to jump to your involvement with fossil fuel divestment and divest in particular, I guess we're wondering, how did you bring the campaign to Stu, and did you find it difficult to be so involved and establish that campaign while you were still a full-time student?
Yeah, it was definitely difficult to balance it with school. So I originally like started the campaign as a project with a group of students in the environmental practice course. So this was like a mock divestment campaign, like it wasn't actually a real thing, but we like it off as a project. Like, if we were to have a divestment campaign, this is what we would do, blah, blah, blah. And then after that course ended, I just kind of like ran with it from there. And I was like, okay, I feel like we may as well actually start this campaign. Or I guess we did kind of start it in that course, but after the course ended, I just kind of took over and started doing it on my own time. And yeah, it was definitely like difficult to balance that with school. But I felt like really supported by like Janice or Dr. Harvey. She like definitely helped me, like guided me through that a lot. And I ended up using it as a project for my senior seminar in environments and society. So it definitely like weaved into my courses really well. So that was nice because it kind of was like, okay, I'm doing this, but it's also helping me in these other courses, which is really great. And then I also started, like I was hired basically to do it through Raven. So that's an environmental activism group run through UNB. It stands for like Rural Action and Voices for the Environment. And so I had like a supervisor through Raven, and she helped kind of guide me through the campaign. And she like I would meet with her every week. So she was really supportive as well. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to do it without her or Dr. Harvey. And also having a divestment campaign at UNB going on simultaneously, I would get together with Rachel, who was heading the campaign there. And so it was really nice to have someone else kind of going through the same thing as me, and we could bounce ideas off each other and sort of collaborate on things. So that was like really huge on helping me like balance everything and stay on top of school while like still being motivated to do the campaign.
Okay, yeah. And it's awesome that you had such amazing support from like faculty like Dr. Harvey and like you said, like your supervisor from Raven and the other divestment coordinator down at UNB. But I guess still kind of on the realm of support, how are the current students who are running the Divest Do campaign, like how are we going to get support, not just from faculty and other students, but from university administration? Because that seems to be a really big wall that I'm sure you have hit and that the students right now are hitting. So what's your advice on that?
Yeah, that's definitely like the biggest hurdle to jump over in all divestment campaigns that I'm aware of at other universities. It's like students and faculty are most of the time on board. It's more just like the Board of Governors is like the governing body of the entire university, and they're the ones who kind of make the final decision. So I had like a couple meetings with the Board of Governors, and it is like very difficult to sort of get them on board and like sway their decisions. But I guess just like I basically like presented my case to them, and I tried to like dumb it down, not because they don't understand, but I'm just like, okay, this is the issue. We have the solution. Like, we can address this problem in like a pretty simple way. And they actually like received my presentation really well, like really positively. I got good feedback. And I mean, I don't think they've actually acted on anything that they said they would yet. So I think that like proving that the student body is like really for this movement is super important in swaying like the governing body of the university, because if students are outside their office protesting or doing whatever, sending letters, that's really like sending a message to the university that like our community wants this to happen, as opposed to like me, just one person going to them and saying, this is what I think we should do. All these people agree. Having them physically see like people on board with this, and like supporting this campaign, I think is really important. But that's also hard right now because you guys are all online. No one's on campus. It's not like you can have like protests or anything right now. So I think it is difficult, but like overall, I would say showing the support of the campus community as a whole is like a really important factor in working with like the higher up people at the university.
Yeah, and it's definitely been interesting to see a couple of other Canadian institutions divest during the pandemic. Like that really gives me hope, that, you know, our voices are being heard in that regard. I guess on a similar note, you know, you talked about how important it is for students to show like a collective voice, show that these issues matter. So on a similar vein, why is it so important for students in particular to be engaged in environmental activism as a whole?
Well, I think because like it is our futures, like it has such a big impact on our lives. And also like even if not everyone is like a like really dedicated environmental activist, like environmental issues are so interconnected with other social and economic issues that like it's something that impacts everybody, whether it's directly or indirectly. So I mean, it does have an effect on every single student. So even if they're not like fighting against pipelines, like okay, well, let's say for example, like the industrial food system, that's a big environmental issue, but then it also has impact on like food security, which is a social and economic issue, which affects like so many people. So like environmental issues are just so intertwined with all of these other problems in our society that have an impact on everyone. So I think that's why like it does matter to every single student in one way or another, even if it's not a direct like environmental impact on them. It's going to affect you in some way or another. So I think that's why it's really important for students to have an understanding of.
Yeah, and if all students had to take one course at STU, I know in a heartbeat I would say to take Environment Society 1013, Understanding Environment.
Yeah.
It's so important. Okay, on that note, if you could give one piece of advice for students who maybe have taken an Environment Society course or have done their own research and know that they want to get involved, what would your advice be to them?
I would say like there's definitely a lot of things you can do on an individual level that can make like a contribution to like the greater society, but as well like getting involved in your community and like say volunteering at places like Hayes Farm or joining an environmental group or something like that, like finding ways to connect yourself with the like environmental community where you are is a really good way of like furthering your interest and your passion without like completely committing yourself to this one thing, because obviously not everyone is going to go on to work in the environmental sector. Like you can't expect everyone to do that. There's lots of other things in the world that needs to be done, but like I would say getting involved like within your community is a really good way of like expressing that passion, and it's also a good way of seeing like a direct impact where you're living. I'm definitely like a believer in like change starting from the ground up and like focusing on where you are and addressing issues like within your local area, and then seeing change sort of like continue from there and like a ripple effect rather than addressing it from the top down. So I would say like community involvement is like a really good step to take if people are finding they're interested in these things but don't want to like fully dive in, you know?
Yeah, it can definitely be daunting when you first learn about the climate crisis and you think, okay, this is an emergency. I need to do something, but where do I start? So, yeah, it's definitely important to start local and build up. But you talked a bit about like, finding issues that you're passionate about and then getting involved in the community. Um, I know a lot of us have like a singular moment, or maybe even if we can't narrow it down, we know that there is a time that we realized that the climate crisis was truly a crisis. So I guess I'm just wondering what your like passion defining moment is, or kind of what your first step into environmental action was.
I'm not really sure. Like, I feel like a lot of people have a story of how they've like sort of come into this like activism place in their life. And I honestly don't know. Like, I just think starting to take this program at STU was so eye opening to me. And it just sort of like lit a fire in me to see that there were so many like global issues going unaddressed, or like there was just so many wrongdoings, and it like really made me angry and upset. And I think like that like emotional reaction to learning all these things really like pushed me. I was like, okay, this is so crazy. Like, I really want to do something about this. I mean, I've always loved like being outside, spending time outdoors, and that's always been something that was like a part of my childhood and stuff. But I never really, I guess like probably in one of my first like environmental classes was sort of like this aha moment where I was like, holy crap, like there's so many problems. Like it just like hit me, and it was so overwhelming, and that just like lit a fire in me to continue doing this work, I guess.
Yeah, I've definitely heard like similar stories of students saying, I've always loved being outdoors, or I always knew about global warming or climate change. And then I took intro to environmental or understanding environmental problems rather. And they're like, and now I know, like now I truly understand. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. It sounds like you've kind of known all along that you have this small fire in you. So I guess my question to you is, what has been one of like your proudest accomplishments so far in being an environmental activist?
I would definitely say like presenting to the Board of Governors was like a huge thing for me. I was really like proud of myself for doing that. And just like the whole divestment campaign, like that was a really big like thing. Like it was really difficult work, but I think it was a really important campaign that like needed to come to our campus. And I'm really happy that it's like being carried on this year, even though I'm not there. So yeah, that's probably one of my like, I don't know, something that I'm really proud of. And I hope that it like continues carrying on until Stu actually does divest from fossil fuels. Um, but also I would say just like um, being like part of the Hayes Farm program, like that was also a really amazing experience. And like there's a lot of problems that you learn about in the program, and I never really knew like where I wanted to focus my energy, because there's like so many different things you can like focus on. But having the opportunity to work at Hayes Farm like really confirmed for me that like food security was something that like that's where I want to like focus my energy now. And just like going through a summer of growing food and like seeing the entire process was like a really impactful experience for me. So that's also something that really like sticks with me as a very like important part of my like environmental work, because I think I'll continue doing like food security work and sustainable farming into my future. Like I think that's kind of where I want to go. So that was definitely like a really big part of my activism, I guess, so far.
Yeah, and we're obviously so excited to see not where you end up because you've already done so many cool things, but the legacy that you've left on Stu with the Divest Stu campaign is alive and is still burning. So definitely. My next question for you, kind of bring it back to the course. So this section of our course is all focused on role models, and obviously we consider you to be a role model just based on your work and everything that you've done. But who would you consider to be your role models?
I would say, like, honestly, Dr. Harvey was really like a really inspirational person for me. She's just accomplished so much, and she's so smart, and she was just always someone I really looked up to throughout my degree. So she's definitely been someone who's like, yeah, she's definitely been a role model for me, and especially as a woman, just like being as successful as she is and having an impact on so many things was really cool to see. Um, as well, I would say Tina O. So she started the fossil fuel divestment campaign at Mount Allison, and she came to do a talk at STU, I think when I was in my second or third year. And that was sort of my first inspiration to start on like a divestment campaign here. And she's gone on to do really cool things too, but like she was just another like strong woman in the environmental field who was just like really inspirational. Yeah, I mean, I've met a lot of really awesome people, but definitely like the women in the environmental field have been like the most inspirational to me.
Yeah, we have so much to learn from each other, and especially like from other women as like women leaders in the environmental movement. Like they're so intelligent and they know so much. We can learn so much from them. I guess kind of a leader that I really look up to is Greta Thunberg. And I guess my question for you is just recently we had another Fridays for Future. Some of us in our class, Intro to Environmental Praxis, we took action on Fridays for Future by writing a letter to Blaine Higgs about the small nuclear reactor dispute, I guess. So basically, the federal government recently announced that it's investing millions of dollars into small nuclear reactor development in New Brunswick. David Kuhn, who's the leader of the Green Party, says that this development rather is going to like open up this Pandora's box of radioactive waste. So I guess our class is wondering kind of what's your take, and do you think that New Brunswick is moving backwards on the environmental issue?
Yeah, so I wrote a few articles about like the interest for New Brunswick wanting to move towards like nuclear power. And I hadn't really learned much about it before, but once I was writing those articles, I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. Like, why is our government doing this? It didn't really make any sense to me. And it still doesn't. And yeah, I don't understand why our government is like continuing to push forward with this. It doesn't make sense financially. It's a major environmental threat. So yeah, I definitely think that it's like not a step in the right direction for our government to be taking. And it's also frustrating because there's so many other solutions to our energy. Like there's so many renewable energy options that we have for a fraction of the cost of what a small like nuclear reactor would be, and like none of the risks that come along with that. So it's really frustrating as a citizen to see your government making these decisions when it's like not the right direction that we should be going in. But I think it's really cool that you got a letter writing campaign. I think those are some of the most like effective ways of being activists, because it is directly going to that person. And when you basically bombard them with letters, they're forced to pay attention to it and address the issue. So I think that's really great that you guys did that. And hopefully more people will continue sort of fighting against it and urging the government to change their decisions.
Yeah, I I agree. So it's very frustrating to live in New Brunswick sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our last question for you, Hannah, is basically for everyone who's going to be listening to this podcast, if everyone could do one thing today to protect the environment, what would that thing be?
I would say like take a look at like your own life and how you're going about your day-to-day things, and like what's really necessary and what isn't, and like where can you make small changes in your day-to-day life to make like a bigger impact. That might be like starting to buy local food, or like taking your bike to school instead of driving, or things like that. Just like little changes are really important. And it's not only like me biking instead of driving in the grand scheme of things doesn't have that big of an effect, but like when people around me see me biking instead of driving, or like making these changes, it has a ripple effect, and like it can motivate other people to make changes in their lives as well. And I think sort of like setting that example is a really important thing that a lot of people can do without making these like huge changes in their lives, or like, oh, so yeah. And I would just say like, since food is something that I'm really passionate about, like buying local food, trying to grow your own food, it's really fun to try and do and super rewarding. So that's definitely something that like people can change in their lives that can have a really big impact, not only on the environment, but like it's also supporting people in your community. And then you'll see your money go back into your community, which is also really nice.
Like you said, it's all about the ripple effect. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for being on our podcast here today and just helping out with this class and all the work you've done. It's been incredible talking to you. And yeah, just thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.